और आत्मसात करने योग्य हमारा अगला सत्र जो कुछ ही देर में अब से प्रारंभ होने जा रहा है, जहां हम साहित्य और सिनेमा पर एक साझी बातचीत करेंगे। तो एक बार फिर से मैं औपचारिक रूप से आप सभी का स्वागत करता हूं हमारे आज के इस दूसरे सत्र में। साहित्य अकादमी दिल्ली, संस्कृति मंत्रालय भारत सरकार द्वारा आयोजित ये अंतर्राष्ट्रीय साहित्य महोत्सव उन्मेष, जिसमें आज का हमारा दूसरा सत्र एक परिचर्चा है साहित्य और सिनेमा के अंतर संबंधों पर। और एक एक करके मैं हमारे वक्ताओं को आमंत्रित करूंगा, जिसमें सबसे पहले मैं आमंत्रित करना चाहूँगा हमारे इस दूसरे सत्र के अध्यक्ष महोदय श्री गिरीश कासरवल्ली जी को। मेरा आग्रह रहेगा श्री गिरीश कासरवल्ली साहब से, जो एक बहुत ही जाने माने फिल्म निर्माता हैं और एक ऐसा नाम जो पैरेलल सिनेमा की दुनिया में किसी परिचय का मोहताज नहीं है। मेरा अनुरोध रहेगा उनसे कि वे आएं और अपना अध्यक्षीय स्थान जो है वे मंच पर ग्रहण करें। श्री गिरीश कासरवल्ली साहब। इसके बाद मैं अनुरोध करूंगा श्री ओपी श्रीवास्तव जी से कि वे भी आएं और हमारे मंच की शोभा बढ़ाएं। श्री ओपी श्रीवास्तव सर, आपको भी एक लेखक और निर्देशक के रूप में हम सभी जानते हैं। इसके बाद मेरा आग्रह रहेगा रत्नोत्तमा सेन गुप्ता जी से कि वे आएं और मंच पर अपना स्थान ग्रहण करें। और अंत में मैं आवाज़ दूंगा त्रिपुरारी शरण जी को, हमारे इस फहरिस्त में आखिरी वक्ता त्रिपुरारी शरण जी, कि वे मंच पर अपना स्थान ग्रहण करें। चूंकि मंच सज चुका है तो बस एक छोटी सी भूमिका हमारे इस सत्र की। इस बात से हम में से कोई गुरेज नहीं करेगा कि साहित्य ने सिनेमा को बहुत समृद्ध करा है और ये दोनों ही कलाएं एक दूसरे पर बहुत निर्भर करती हैं। और ख़ास तौर पर साहित्य से बहुत कुछ ऐसा है जो सिनेमा ने समय समय पर लिया है, वो लेता रहा है और जिसने उसे समृद्ध बनाया है। आगे बढ़ते हुए मैं श्री निर्मल कांति भट्टाचार्य जी, जो कि एक सीनियर लेखक हैं, वरिष्ठ लेखक हैं और साहित्य अकादमी से वर्षों से जुड़े रहे हैं, मैं उनसे आग्रह करूंगा कि कृपया वे मंच पर आएं और हमारे तमाम वक्ताओं का एक उत्तरीय देके उनका स्वागत करें। श्री निर्मल कांति भट्टाचार्य जी, सर्वप्रथम मैं आग्रह करूंगा कि हमारे अध्यक्ष महोदय श्री गिरीश कासरवल्ली साहब का आप स्वागत करें, अभिनंदन करें। और हम सब की ओर से इसके पश्चात श्री ओपी श्रीवास्तव जी से मैं आग्रह करूंगा कि उनका स्वागत हो। रत्नोत्तमा सेन गुप्ता जी से मेरा अनुरोध रहेगा। और अंत में त्रिपुरारी शरण जी का स्वागत हम सभी के समक्ष निर्मल जी करेंगे। बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद सर। और जैसा कि मैं कह रहा था कि ये दोनों ही कलाएं एक दूसरे पे बहुत निर्भर करती हैं और साहित्य ने बहुत कुछ दे के समय समय पे सिनेमा को समृद्ध किया है और उसे कई ऐसे आयाम बख्शे हैं जिससे सिनेमा, और ख़ास तौर पे जो पैरेलल सिनेमा है, समकालीन सिनेमा जो है, वो जहाँ है वहाँ और उस आयाम तक वो पहुँच पाया है। तो बगैर इसके कि मैं बहुत समय आपके और हमारे वक्ताओं के बीच लूं, क्योंकि हम यूं भी कुछ देरी से चल रहे हैं, मैं सीधे एक एक करके हमारे वक्ताओं से आग्रह करूंगा कि वे आएं और आज के इस विषय पर उनके जो विचार हैं वे हम सभी के समकक्ष रखें। इस क्रम में सबसे पहले मेरा आग्रह रहेगा श्री त्रिपुरारी शरण जी से कि वे आएं। त्रिपुरारी शरण जी का एक छोटा सा परिचय। सर, मैं 1 मिनट लूंगा, माफ़ी चाहूँगा। आप भारतीय प्रशासनिक सेवा के पूर्व अधिकारी रहे हैं। लगभग 4 दशकों के अपने इस करियर में आपने 4 साल से अधिक समय भारतीय फिल्म और टेलीविज़न संस्थान यानी FTII पुणे के निदेशक के रूप में आपने दिया है, और 3 साल तक दूरदर्शन के महानिदेशक के रूप में भी आपने अपनी सेवाएं दी हैं। सिनेमा और अन्य दृश्य श्रव्य माध्यमों पर कई राष्ट्रीय और अंतर्राष्ट्रीय संगोष्ठियों और सम्मेलनों में आपका बहुमूल्य योगदान रहा है। हिंदी साहित्य की दुनिया से आपकी निकटता बहुत अरसे से रही है। आपका पहला उपन्यास माधवपुर का घर इसी वर्ष प्रकाशित हुआ है, और आप बिहार के मुख्य सचिव के पद से आप सेवानिवृत्त हुए, और हाल में आप बिहार राज्य के सूचना आयुक्त के रूप में सेवारत हैं। तो जीवन के इतने लंबे अनुभव क्षेत्र से आने वाले व्यक्ति, हमारे सर्वप्रथम वक्ता, मैं सर से आग्रह करूंगा कि वे आएं और अपनी बात हम सभी के सामने रखें। श्री त्रिपुरारी शरण जी।
Friends, we are here to discuss the interrelations between cinema and literature. Well, to begin with, the moment we talk of interrelations, then we need to avoid notions of exclusion, in the sense that one medium does not exclude the other. They're both kind of intermeshed into each other, not in terms of the written word or the images, but in terms of what they are supposed to, I mean, in idiomatic terms, I would say, they are intermeshed with each other. Now, there are several dimensions to this whole question of interrelations between cinema and literature. Cinema has borrowed quite substantially from the world of literature, and just one example will shed enough light on this whole question of how cinema has borrowed heavily from the world of literature. When I tell you that initially Satyajit Ray wanted to make, when he ventured into the world of filmmaking, he wanted to make a film out of the novel Prisoner of Zenda. Films had been made on that novel earlier also, in the year 1937 or 35, I don't remember the exact year. But it was at that time that Ray came in touch with Jean Renoir, who was an American citizen, but the son of a very famous French artist, and who had come down to India to make his feature called The River, which went on to become pretty famous. And Ray became friends with Renoir. He, in fact, spent a lot of time with him, and it was when Ray realized that Renoir was making a film on a novel on a work by the famous writer Rumer Godin, that Ray was persuaded to look for the source of his film elsewhere, and that is when he decided to look into Bengali literature and chose Vibhuti Bhushan Bandyopadhyay's Pathir Panchali as the source of his first film. And as they say, the rest is history. So much of Bengali cinema, and excellent Bengali cinema, world-class cinema, has borrowed from the world of, I wouldn't use the word borrowed, I would say leaned upon the world of literature to make such classy movies. So, this sense of interdependence, anyway, is something which you cannot dismiss, something which you cannot avoid. There has been enough interdependence between, well, not interdependence really, but dependence of the world of cinema on the world of literature. But in what way? That is what is more important. How has cinema leaned upon the world of literature, and what is it that it has got from the world of literature? There are a few things I would definitely like to underline. Between the two mediums, one dwells on the world of words, the other on the world of images. Now, when we talk of meaning, making meaning out of the world of words and out of the world of images, can we talk about a congruence between these two worlds? And in terms of meaning, in terms of making meaning, congruence between words and images is something that is of very great importance in the world of cinema. And on the other hand, while there are countless literary works which have expressed the human condition in innumerable ways, there possibly aren't as many contemplative works of cinema on the human condition. As a preliminary example, I would like to take the audience to the world that the Taiwanese master creates in his famous film, Flight of the Red Balloon. This film has to be seen for the kind of serene and contemplative beauty it explores in the quotidian world. The film is based in the city of Paris, and it was one of the first films of Hu Xiaoxian outside the Asian world and based in the world of Paris. And I have seen the city of Paris and the world that exists out there. But I will admit to you that the world that Hu Xiaoxian's film, The Flight of the Red Balloon, showed me was something out of the world. I cannot forget the images that this film projected during the course of its screening. So, this particular film is not something which has leaned upon any work of literature. So, there is, I mean, in terms of interdependence, we do not need to talk about any kind of necessity or any kind of necessary interdependence. The two medium are independent mediums, so we need to talk about what one can borrow from the other. A lot of films have stood on their, have been created out of a script written de novo, a script written by writers without any reference to any other audiovisual work. So in that sense, we need to talk about the imperatives of cinema. when we talk about its borrowing from the world of literature. Now, as I said earlier, uh, it is not necessary that great works of cinema need to borrow from the world of literature. One of my favorite filmmakers, Michael Haneke from Austria, he's made so many films and world-class films which have also been awarded at some of the most celebrated international festivals. And he's made films which are not only politically sensitive, but also aesthetically, of a different class. So he's not borrowed, he's not leaned upon literature or any literary work for his films. There is no necessary interdependence that we are talking about. And while one can say in literature, storytelling is as much of vital importance as it is in cinema. In cinema, we all know that storytelling needs to be interspersed, interpolated with high quality documentary footage for the cinema to be of a certain order, of a certain class. All of you who have seen Francis Ford Coppola's Apocalypse Now would recall the film, the way it proceeds through the jungles of Vietnam. And I do hope all of you know that the film was essentially it draws upon Joseph Conrad's work, An Area of Darkness. But the way it has filmed Vietnam, the way it has filmed the war, I mean, not the war per se, but the journey of these soldiers who are on a mission to kill the hero Colonel Kurtz, which was played by I'm forgetting the name, very famous actor. So, but what Apocalypse Now became famous for is the way it has depicted the horrors of Vietnam War without actually going into the war situation and filming the war situation. So, just as in literature, there is so much meaning that is contained between the lines. In cinema also, there is so much meaning contained between images. There is so much meaning which you can draw upon beyond the images. And somebody like Girish, who's a master filmmaker, he would know how a lot of meaning can be drawn beyond the images, and how best interpolations can be done between images. And therefore, I would like to take you to another, to give you another example of a film which I would say is based on a work of literature, but not a very high-class literature. All of you who have heard of John Masters and his famous novels, Bhavani Junction and all, would know that several of his novels were converted into films. But they are essentially, those novels essentially are novels of the empire. And my friend, who is now of course no more, Vijaya Mule, wrote a very scholarly book on the place of India in international cinema. It is called, the name of the book is From Rajas and Yogis to Gandhi and Beyond, Images of India in International Films of the 20th Century. This is a work she compiled over a period of almost 2 decades of, very I would say, remarkable perseverance. So these films, for example, she calls them the films based on John Masters' novels, she calls them empire cinema. And empire cinema gives you all the necessary fodder for understanding the colonial country that India was. But the way those films have been made, I like to contrast the images coming out of these films of the empire cinema with what our own filmmakers have done. For example, the film Tisri Kasam, made by, I'm not able to remember the name of the director, but it was based on Fanishwarnath Renu's work, his story called Mare Gaye Gulfam. And you should see the film for, and it's just the period is just after independence. You have to see that film to be able to appreciate the way it captures captures the rural India just merely after a few years after independence. And when you contrast the images coming out of these films with the films made on John Masters' novels, then you realize that, quality, the class of literature on which you base your cinema will also determine the ultimate quality and the output of your cinema in terms of its political overtones, or in terms of its political meaning, and in terms of even the kind of message that it conveys. The main thing to consider is that, writers can storm the minds of human beings through their words. So can the filmmakers through their images. But there are limitations to both. And it is in being able to overcome these limitations that the ultimate quality of your work lies. The ultimate appreciation from the audience or from the reader will depend on how you straddle these two worlds with efficacy and efficiency. In the film school, when students are admitted, amongst their initial training, amongst their early classes, they're asked to distinguish between showing and telling. What do you show? When you show, what do you show? When you show, what do you do? And when you tell, what do you tell? And what do you do? So the difference between showing and telling, it sounds very easy, but when you go into the world of filmmaking, it is the world of showing and telling, the dual world of showing and telling, that you have to straddle with some efficacy, some efficiency, to be able to make meaning out of the images that you create. Again, as I said right in the beginning, that for making great cinema, you do not need to lean on great literature, but cinema can draw on great literature, and I have given you examples. And one example from the other side of great cinema being made without any reference, without any leaning on literature, for that, the most prominent example I like to share with people is that of the film of Ozu, his very famous film called The Tokyo Story, which has been rated time and again as one of the best films of the 20th century. That is a film which I would definitely recommend to each one of you who's a cinema lover to see. And it's a film, Ozu, as you know, was a master Japanese filmmaker, and this film shows you Japan of that particular period like nothing else can show you, just through images and just very minimalist conversations. Most of Ozu's films are like that, but the Tokyo Story is especially relevant, especially eminent because of the way it has shown the decline of the family and the decline of the social setup in Japan in the post-World War period. So, so there is much that can be said on both sides, on the side of literature and the side of cinema, but I think the ultimate thing that one can learn from a discourse of interrelationship, or a discourse on interrelationships between the world of cinema and literature is that, you know, there is no exclusivity between these two worlds, and to be able to lean, for a filmmaker to be able to lean on the world of literature, he needs to straddle the world carefully, needs to have confidence, have the knowledge of the other world in enough measure, in full measure, to be able to borrow judiciously from that world. And similarly, for the world of literature, one can say that writers, they don't need to lean on the world of cinema, but if there is something that the world of cinema can tell them, can not teach them, but can tell them, is that there is a meaning beyond the images, there's a meaning possible beyond the words that you write. And with this, I would like to thank Sahitya Academy for giving me this opportunity for speaking on cinema and literature. Thank you all of you.
Thank you so much, sir, for your useful insight into this coexistential relationship of cinema and literature. Moving ahead, the next speaker on our list, whom I would like to call, मैं अनुरोध करूंगा रत्नोत्तमा सेन गुप्ता जी से, उनके संक्षिप्त परिचय के साथ। आप सिनेमा पर लेखन के लिए आपको राष्ट्रीय पुरस्कार से सम्मानित किया जा चुका है। आप टाइम्स ऑफ इंडिया, द टेलीग्राफ, स्क्रीन तथा cinebengal.com जैसी संस्थाओं से जुड़ के काम कर चुकी हैं। आपने कई पुस्तकें लिखी हैं, जिनमें प्रमुख रूप से मिस्ट्रेस ऑफ मेलोडीज़, दैट बर्ड कॉल्ड हैप्पीनेस, मी एंड आई ऐसी किताबें शामिल हैं। आप संस्मरण लेखन, कहानियों का अनुवाद तथा पुस्तकों का संपादन भी करती हैं। आपने कई कला प्रदर्शनियों और फिल्म समारोहों को क्यूरेट किया है और आप कई राष्ट्रीय और अंतर्राष्ट्रीय पुरस्कारों की जूरी में शामिल रह चुकी हैं। इसी के साथ मैं अनुरोध करूंगा रत्नोत्तमा सेन गुप्ता जी से कि वे माइक पर आएं और आज के विषय पर अपने विचार हमसे साझा करें। रत्नोत्तमा सेन गुप्ता जी।
धन्यवाद। अगर परमिशन मिले आपका तो आई वुड लाइक टू स्पीक फ्रॉम हियर। वहाँ तो शायद मैं पीछे छुप जाऊँ, आप लोगों को दिखाई नहीं पड़ूँ, एंड disembodied voice is not going to be very visual. Thank you, all of you, and most of all Sahitya Academy for this occasion. Some of you may know that I'm privileged to be born in the household of a writer who was a very big name in screenplay writing, which means, as he writes in his own autobiography, his life ran on two rails. One was literature, one was cinema. And I've grown up with the ethos, with the main characteristics of the written words and the visuals. Even before I started reading anything, alphabet, ABC, I was looking at visuals, books, because books were everywhere in my house on my bed. We had to take off the book before we went to bed. We had to put them back in the morning, and so on and so forth. So anyway, and suddenly it dawned on me that letters are as much visual. You start reading letters only when you are looking at them. And perhaps what in India we didn't have for many years is film literacy, how to look at the visuals. Anyway, one of the things Baba writes in his autobiography, incidentally, my father's name was Nabendu Ghosh, and he was the screenplay writer for most of Bimal Roy films, but not only Bimal Roy. I mean, he wrote for almost the entire generation of directors of 50s and 60s and 70s. So he writes somewhere that Bimalda and I always look to literature for story, the raw material of cinema. People can and do write original scripts for the silver screen, but we did not prefer that because it tends to be hurried writing. We prefer to source our films from books because a writer has already worked on an idea, on the characters, on the logic of their action, and its final resolution. Now, that is perhaps why we find when we look back in the 30s, cinema virtually in India came on its own as an art form in the 30s, through 40s, also in the 50s, in India, particularly in Bengal, elsewhere too, I'll come to some of the names, was entirely dependent on literature. The directors were literate, educated people who made films essentially for an educated audience, and they drew their subjects from literature. Subsequently, the divide started growing in the 60s. Primarily why? Because, once again, I go back to Nabendu Ghosh. He says that he did not actually narrate his own stories to producers. He learned quickly after shifting to Bombay, and S. Mukherjee was the person who sort of pointed out to him this difference. He realized that literature is sourced from pain and suffering, sordid woes, to point out what needs correction. Essentially, literature is a voice of conscience. Cinema is a dream, wish fulfillment, and poetic justice in 3 hours, as Harivansh Rai Bachchan once told his big son. So, the basic difference between cinema and literature is not leaning, as Tripurari says. I would use the word adaptation. It doesn't necessarily have to tell a story, but cinema also deals with emotion. Cinema also deals with society. Cinema also deals with the mind. Literature has an advantage over cinema. Literature, when you're reading the alphabets, you are using your eyes, yes, but it's your mind. Like the kite, your mind is floating in the air of imagination. Cinema, on the other hand, brings the reality of the world out there, outside world. It has brought indoors. You're sitting in a darkened auditorium. Well, no one sits in a darkened auditorium anymore, but well, even so, you are with the screen, no matter how small it's. People are watching films on mobiles now, but it has brought the far distant into your homes, into the palm of your hand. So the reverse journey. And what happens is a personal experience. When I read Pather Pachali, I was about 14 or 15. And when I watched Pather Pachali a year or so too later, I grew up in Bombay, so Bengali was not the first language I grew up with. Anyway, I was disappointed when I saw Pather Pachali. It took me quite a while and a number of viewing to realize how resolved a piece of cinema it is. Why? Because when I had read Pather Pachali, I was immersed in the world Vibhuti Bhushan Bandyopadhyay had created through his words, through his imagination, through his emotions. One example of Vibhuti Bhushan's superb ability is Chandel Pahar. Most of you may not have heard of it. He wrote this fiction adventure where a guy from a Bengal village goes to Africa and the adventure he goes through. And years later, we are amazed to find how he wrote that in an age when there was no Google map, when there was hardly any sort of world map to fall back on. And he wrote such detailed stories. So that was imagination at work, superb, but also rooted to the soil. And the other side of it, going into the mind, I'd seen a film that was the Diary of Paul Nijinsky. Paul Nijinsky was a ballet artist who went out of his mind. He became mad. But he used to write a journal, and the journal traces this journey. In recent years, another person has written about his experience of going out of his mind. So this was made into a film by Paul Cox, right? Paul Cox made this film, and he used technology. He used, the computer screen many years ago, initial years, suddenly used to, go blank, and there would be only wavy figures. And Paul Cox used this image of a mind going blank and going, disintegrating, a total visual disintegrating. So even that experience has been brought into cinema. I won't take too much of your time, but today what has happened is literature, forget literature classics, forget epics, forget short story or poems. Tisri Kasam was, 5-page story, which was made into a 2.5-hour film. Again, screenplay was by Nabendu Ghosh. Poems. Do Bigha Zameen derived, the germination came from Tagore's poem. Talking of Michelangelo, poetry has been made into a film by a young lady, Madhurima Sinha, and so on and so forth. We have examples of all these. But I'm coming from the background of journalism, and I would like to point out in recent years, 2 areas which were in the realm of documentary has become the mainstay of mainstream. Biopics and headlines, current news. So many of our mainstream blockbusters are now being sourced from whether Bhag Milkha Bhag and Mary Kom to Hotel Mumbai, Uri, whatever, Kedarnath, Raghav Raman. In Bengali, Atta Atel, Bonga Local. These all got their material from the headlines of newspapers. Today, going one step forward, we are poised at a time where artificial intelligence is shaking up the world of cinema. Bollywood, uh, forget Bollywood, Hollywood, newspaper, edit writers, everyone is talking about how artificial intelligence will impact reality through cinema. So, literature will never go away, perhaps, but literature certainly will not go away. I believe that literature, in one form or the other, cinema itself is literature in motion, in moving images. So we will always have literature, but not primarily for telling stories, perhaps. Cinema will be a medium of experiencing. We are already seeing, we are seeing films about space travel. Chandrayaan, I mean, in 68, 69, when these people landed on moon, television was still an unknown thing in India, but we were so excited. Chandrayaan, now people sitting in aeroplanes, they're taking photographs of the Chandrayaan journey, and so on and so forth. So space travel in Hollywood, we are seeing all kinds of philosophic discussion through the medium of cinema. Who knows what we will look for in cinema, because, well, cinema itself has undergone a definition change, I think, with the new platform OTT coming into our lives to stay. But I will not hold up the discussion. I mean, we have speakers like, of course, Girish Kasravalli, but also O.P. Srivastava. So, thank you for lending me your ears.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for letting us know the changing contours of relationship between literature and cinema because of the interruptions caused by the technology and AI and all. Thank you so much. Moving ahead, अगला नाम जो मैं यहाँ से पुकारूंगा, हमारे अगले वक्ता श्री O.P. श्रीवास्तव साहब। उनके परिचय में बहुत सी बातों में से कुछ जिनका जिक्र मैं यहाँ करना चाहूँगा। आप फिल्मों के लेखक और निर्देशक हैं। आपकी अब तक 4 प्रकाशित कृतियाँ हैं। आपने एक कम बजट की फिक्शन फिल्म मिस्ड कॉल का निर्माण किया था, जिसने 2007 में कांस में भारत का प्रतिनिधित्व किया, तथा जो 2008 में रेड सी इंटरनेशनल फिल्म फेस्टिवल इजराइल में सर्वश्रेष्ठ अंतर्राष्ट्रीय फीचर फिल्म भी घोषित की गई थी। आपने 2013 में ब्रेन कैंसर पर एक डॉक्यूमेंट्री अ फ्यू डेज मोर का निर्देशन किया। इसके बाद एक फीचर डॉक्यूमेंट्री लाइफ इन मेटाफर्स अ पोर्ट्रेट ऑफ गिरीश कासरवल्ली, ये आपने एक फिल्म बनाई जिसका निर्देशन किया, और इसके लिए आपको 2015 में सर्वश्रेष्ठ जीवनी फिल्म के राष्ट्रीय पुरस्कार से भी सम्मानित किया गया। आपने 2016 में YKT मुंबई का निर्देशन किया। उसके बाद अल्जाइमर रोग पर आधारित माय मेंटर माय हीरो तथा व्हाट्स योर स्टोरी डॉक्यूमेंट्री फिल्मों का भी निर्देशन किया। हाल में आपने एक फिक्शन फिल्म बनवारी की अम्मा पूरी की है। सो वी आर रियली एक्साइटेड टू हियर इट फ्रॉम यू सर। सो आई हैंड ओवर द स्टेज टू O.P. श्रीवास्तव सर।
Thank you so much. नमस्कार। मैं थोड़ा हिंदी में भी बोल सकता हूँ, आपकी परमिशन हो तो। मेरी मातृभाषा हिंदी है। फिल्में भी हिंदी में बनाता हूँ, अंग्रेज़ी में भी बनाता हूँ। जैसा कि आज का द टॉपिक फॉर टुडे इज़ लिटरेचर एंड सिनेमा। So allow me to just go back a little in history. These are two independent things. literature and cinema. And what we are trying to discuss and explore today is the relationship between literature and cinema. So I'll come to the relationship later on. Let me first define what I understand by literature and what I understand by cinema. So all of us will agree that literature is something which is probably centuries old. हम रामायण को भी लिटरेचर कहते हैं, महाभारत को भी लिटरेचर कह सकते हैं. लिटरेचर हज़ारों सालों से हमारे यहाँ लिखा जा रहा है, पढ़ा जा रहा है, बात करते हैं, उसका हमने एक्सपीरियंस किया है. प्रेमचंद थे, उसके बाद फणीश्वरनाथ रेणु, हज़ारों लेखक हुए हैं. उन्होंने जो कुछ भी लिखा, बोला, उसको हम लिटरेचर कहते हैं. तो एक तो ये लिटरेचर है जो कि सदियों पुराना है, और इसको जो लिखने की कला है वो भी सदियों पुरानी है. वो आज नहीं पैदा हुई, वो हज़ारों साल से उसका उद्भव हुआ है, उसका डेवलपमेंट हो रहा है, उसका कल्टीवेशन हो रहा है. वो विधा एक जो हज़ारों साल से सिंच रही है, पक रही है, बढ़ रही है. ठीक है, वो हम सब देख रहे हैं हज़ारों सालों से. इसके अगेंस्ट सिनेमा पैदा हुआ था 1895 में. पहला सिनेमा जो बना बाहर, जो एक ट्रेन थी, उसको उन्होंने उसके शॉट्स ले लिए और उसको एक साथ एक्सपेरिमेंट किया, और वो कहा ये देखिए ट्रेन चलती हुई आ रही है, लोग निकल रहे हैं, और वो पहला सिनेमा बन गया. ठीक है, तो सिनेमा हमारा जो है, जो ये कला है, वो एक से 150 साल पुरानी है. ठीक है, तो कहाँ एक विधा जो सिर्फ 150 साल पुरानी है, हम उसकी मैरिज करते हैं एक ऐसी विधा से जो हज़ारों साल पुरानी है. ठीक है, ठीक है, तो ये जो रिलेशनशिप है वो इट्स लाइक अ मैरिज. Now, when we talk about using literature in cinema, what we are talking about is how a novel or a story is converted into a piece of a cinema. Is that what we are all talking about today? So, मैं आपको एक छोटा सा उदाहरण देता हूँ. हम जब पढ़ते हैं, कोई नावल पढ़ते हैं, तो हमारे पास अपना पूरा समय होता है उसको पढ़ने का. हम चाहे वो छत पे लेके नावल जाके पढ़ें, चाहे वो बाथरूम में पढ़ें, चाहे वो चलती ट्रेन में पढ़ें या कार में पढ़ें, हवाई जहाज़ में पढ़ें, हम अपनी मर्ज़ी के मालिक हैं. हम एक नावल 1000 दिन में पढ़ सकते हैं, कुछ लोग उसको 2 घंटे में पढ़ जाते हैं. इट डिपेंड्स ऑन वेदर यू लाइक इट और यू डोंट लाइक इट. बट जब हम सिनेमा देखते हैं तो हम वो 2 घंटा 3 घंटे में लाइट ऑफ की जाती है और लाइट बंद कर दी जाती है. हमारे पास कोई लिबर्टी नहीं है कि हम अभी भाई रोकना, अभी हम नहीं देखेंगे, अभी थोड़ा सा भारी हो गया है सर, अभी समझ में नहीं आ रहा है. यू डोंट हैव दैट लिबर्टी. सो व्हाट आई एम ट्राइंग टू से इज दैट व्हेन यू रीड अ नॉवेल, योर डोमेन ऑफ एक्सपीरियंस, योर स्फेयर ऑफ एक्सपीरियंस इज इनफिनाइट. मैं आपको एक उदाहरण देता हूँ. आपने नॉवेल में एक शब्द पढ़ा, जल, वाटर. अब आपके दिमाग में, आपके जहन में एक पिक्चर आई. वो जल नल का हो सकता है, वो झरने का हो सकता है, वो पहाड़ का हो सकता है, वो नाले का हो सकता है. एक 360 डोमेन है आपके दिमाग के अंदर जिसमें वो आपका एक्सपीरियंस दौड़ेगा जी. लेकिन अगर हम एज अ सिनेमा मेकर, फिल्म मेकर, हमसे कहा जाए कि आपको जल दिखाना है अपनी फिल्म में, तो मेरे पास क्या है? मेरे पास एक पर्दा है 19:6 का रेशियो जिसको कहते हैं हम लोग, 3:4 का भी, और वो फिक्स्ड फ्रेम है. एक इतना कटा हुआ फ्रेम आता है, ये फ्रेम. तो इसके अंदर मुझे कहा जाए आप जल दिखा दीजिए, तो मेरे पास इतनी लिबर्टी नहीं कि मैं नल भी दिखाऊं, मैं झरना भी दिखाऊं, मैं नदी भी दिखाऊं, मैं सागर भी दिखाऊं, मैं चंद्रमा पे जल भी दिखा दूं. मैं एक इमेज लाएगा which will be a constant image for 10 सेकेंड और 20 सेकेंड. तो या तो वो नदी की इमेज हो सकती है, या वो झरने की हो सकती है, या वो नल की हो सकती है. तो what I'm trying to say is, when you are converting that word, the novel, into cinema, you have thousands of limitations under which you have to convert that novel, that story, into cinema. हमारे पास अगर हमसे कहा जाए आप जैसे मैंने क्या दूसरा एग्जाम्पल, और भी बहुत सारे एग्जाम्पल, मिल्क. अब मिल्क की आपने पढ़ लिया, उनके देश में मिल्क की नदियां बहती थीं. आपका माइंड तो फ्लोट कर जाएगा, आप कुछ भी सोच सकते हैं. मिल्क की नदियां कैसी होती हैं उस देश में, यह होता था, ये होता था, वो होता. तो आपको जो विचरण, माइंड का जो विचरण है, उसकी कोई फाइनाइट कैपेसिटी नहीं है. वो कहीं भी जा सकता है, कुछ भी सोच सकता है. लेकिन मुझसे कहा जाए कि आप ये मिल्क की नदियां पर्दे पर दिखा दीजिए, तो मैं कैसे दिखाऊंगा? एक तो ये परेशानी. So what I'm trying to say is, when you convert literature into cinema, it's not a very smooth flow of things. It's called adaptation. रतोत्मा जी ने बताया कि इसको जब नॉवेल को हम सिनेमा में कन्वर्ट करते हैं तो उस प्रोसेस को कहा जाता है एडॉप्टेशन. और गिरीश जी मेरे मेंटर हैं, सामने बैठे हुए हैं. गिरीश जी इज द मास्टर ऑफ अडेप्टिंग स्टोरीज इनटू सिनेमा. ना आप इनसे पूछिएगा, ये बताएंगे आपको. ये एक लिटरेचर लिखना एक अलग विधा है, एक अलग ग्रामर होती है उसकी, एक अलग क्या कहना चाहिए, शैली है उसकी. इसी तरह सिनेमा की भी एक अपनी शैली है. सिनेमा इज अ टेक्नोलॉजिकल इन्वेंशन. इट्स अ टेक्निक which has its own language, which has its own grammar, which has its own idioms, which has its own pace. So बहुत सारे लोगों को लगता है कि सिनेमा जैसे हम डॉक्टर होता है ना, वो मेडिसिन पढ़ता है, उसकी इतनी थियरी पढ़ता है पहले, फिर उसके बाद जाके कहीं इंजेक्शन लगा पाता है. तो सिनेमा भी जो है, जो लोग ये समझते हैं कि सिनेमा खाली कैमरा पकड़ के शूट कर दिया वो सिनेमा हो जाता है, वो सिनेमा नहीं है. उस सिनेमा को बनाने का, पर्दे पर उतारने से पहले आपको सिनेमा की थ्योरी समझनी पड़ती है. और वो थ्योरी इतनी बड़ी है कि उस पर FTIA में 5 साल का कोर्स होता है. जैसे आपके MBBS में डॉक्टर बनने से 5 साल का कोर्स आप करते हैं, वैसे ही FTIA में जिसके डीन्स आपके सामने बैठे हुए हैं और जिसके विद्यार्थी हैं गोल्ड मेडलिस्ट गिरीश जी, उसमें 5 साल और हम जैसे लोग जिन्हें FTIA जाने का सौभाग्य नहीं मिला लेकिन वो सिनेमा बनाना चाहते थे, उन्हें तो वो समझते समझते 10 से 15-20 साल भी लग जाते हैं. ठीक है. इट्स नॉट सच अ सिंपल थिंग. सो व्हाट आई एम ट्राइंग टू से इज, सी, जो सिनेमा और लिटरेचर का संबंध बहुत पुराना है. पहली फिल्म बनी थी आलम आरा, वो भी एक स्टोरी पर, कहानी पर बेस्ड थी. उसके बाद प्रेमचंद की कई कहानियों पर फिल्में बनी, गोदान बनी, शतरंज के खिलाड़ी बनी. रतोत्मा जी ने बताया कि वो फणेश्वरनाथ रेणु की स्टोरी मारे गए गुलफाम, उस पर तीसरी कसम जैसी बेहतरीन फिल्म बनी. लेकिन आई डिड सम एक्सरसाइज. इफ यू गो टू गूगल और गो टू विकिपीडिया, टाइप आउट saying that film based on literary novels made in India. Okay, so you will get a list of those, maybe 150 films or 200 films or 300 films. But do an exercise of finding out how many of those films were successful films. तो फिल्म बनाने वाले के लिए सबसे बड़ी तो हिंदुस्तान में क्या, फिल्म जो एक एडवेंचर है, इट्स मोर लाइक, हिंदुस्तान में 1200 या 1500 फिल्में बनती हैं साल में, और उसमें कितनी फिल्में अपना इन्वेस्टमेंट रिकवर कर पाती हैं? मे बी नॉट मोर देन 5 to 10%. तो इतना तो रिस्की बिजनेस है जिसमें 5-10% तो आप बहुत अच्छी फिल्म बना लें, स्टार्स को लेकर बना लें, किसी को लेकर बना लें, कितने पैसे में बना लें, कितनी टेक्नोलॉजी यूज़ करके लाएं, तब भी उसकी सफलता का प्रतिशत 5 से 10% से ज़्यादा नहीं है। तो अब आप ये सोचें कि तब क्या होगा जब हम एक लिटरेचर से एक नॉवल उठाएंगे और उसको सिनेमा के फॉर्मेट में फिट करेंगे और फिर सोचेंगे कि ये बहुत अच्छी फिल्म बन गई। ऐसी फिल्में बनी हैं, तीसरी कसम इज़ एन एग्जाम्पल, ठीक है। ऐसी बहुत सारी फिल्में बनी हैं जो कि लिटरेचर पर बेस्ड थी। और गिरीश जी से सुनिएगा, गिरीश जी ने 20-25 फिल्म बनाई हैं, जिसमें मेरे ख्याल से 20-22 फिल्म स्ट्रेट अवे नॉवेल से उठाई गई होंगी और सारी की सारी सक्सेसफुल रही हैं। सो ये एक कोई महारथी ही कर सकता है, ऑर्डिनरी फिल्म मेकर नहीं कर सकता कि वो नावल उठाए और उसका जो एक्सपीरियंस है, नावल का जो एसेंस है, उसको वो पर्दे पर छाप दे। ये एक बहुत बड़ी कला है, ये सब लोग नहीं कर सकते, ठीक है। तो व्हाट आई एम ट्राइंग टू से इज दैट दिस मैरिज ऑफ लिटरेचर एंड सिनेमा is not so easy, and especially in the days of today where cinema, see, जब हमने 70-80 की फिल्में होती थी उसमें कुछ कहानी होती थी, वो रोया, वो धोया, उसका घर से निकाला, माँ ने मारा, बाप ने मारा, फिर भी एक कहानी होती थी, उसके अंदर एक कहानी होती थी। आज की फिल्म, मैं नाम नहीं लेना चाहता, हमारे बहुत सारे यंग ऑडियंस हैं यहाँ पर, हमने ऐसी ऐसी फिल्म देखी हैं अभी एक पिछले 1-2 साल में, जिसमें अगर आप उससे बाहर निकलें तो उनसे पूछे बेटा इसकी स्टोरी क्या थी, वो स्टोरी पता नहीं, बट वो जो उसने मारा उसने, और जो सीजी का इफेक्ट्स थे, जो स्पेशल इफेक्ट्स थे, जो उसने ऊपर से छलांग लड़ाई और ये किया वो किया, यू नो। तो सिनेमा हैज़ बिकम 90% ऑफ टेक्नोलॉजी एंड 10% ऑफ स्टोरी टुडे, whereas when it started it used to be 90% of story and 10% of your technique, because the technique and technology was not so developed at that point in time. But today the film has become nothing but more 90% is technology. आप स्पेशल इफेक्ट दिखाइए, 5D साउंड डाल दीजिए, ये हाईजैक वो हाईजैक, ये सीजी वो सीजी, फिल्म बन गई, ठीक है। अब आज का दौर तो ये आ गया है कि हम अच्छा, बीच में क्या हुआ, गिरीश ने मुझे एक बार बताया था, एक दौर ऐसा आया 1990 या 2000 में कि बासु भट्टाचार्य जी ने ये दौर शुरू किया था हिंदुस्तान में। पहली फिल्म उनकी आई थी सारा काश, उसके बाद बहुत सारे जो फिल्म, बासु चैटर्जी, सॉरी। तो जो लोगों को कहानी, अच्छा, एक दौर ये आया कि लोगों ने कहा कि भाई हम दूसरे की कहानी के ऊपर फिल्म क्यों बनाएं, हमारे पास अपने अंदर कुछ है, इच्छा है, हमारे दिमाग में, जहन में एक स्टोरी है, हम स्टोरी पे क्यों बनाते हैं। तो एक दौर यह आया जब राइटर और फिल्म मेकर दोनों एक बन गए, उनको हम ऑथियर्स कहते हैं, जिन्हें जो अपनी खुद कहानी लिखते थे, अपनी ही कहानी पर ही फिल्म बनाते थे। तो एक बहुत सारा एक दौर आया जिसमें कि उन्होंने खुद अपनी कहानी लिखी और खुद ही फिल्म बना दी, ये हो गया। अब आज दौर ये आ गया है कि हमें स्टोरी की ज़रूरत ही नहीं है, क्योंकि कोई भी बिग बजट फिल्म उठा के आप देख लीजिए, उसमें स्टोरी नहीं होती, उसमें खाली टेक्नोलॉजी होती। और मैम ने जिक्र किया चंद्रयान की, या चंद्रयान पे भी कहानियाँ, मैं तो कहना मैं ये चाह रहा हूँ कि आज 90% टेक्नोलॉजी होने की वजह से टेक्नोलॉजी ने सब कुछ चेंज कर दिया है। The way we live, the way we eat, the way we think, the way we perceive cinema, everything around us is changing. Our lifestyle is changing. Yeah? So, cinema is also changing. Yeah? और आज तो ये दौर आ गया है कि आने वाले दिन में, अब मैं आज सवेरे या उसमें फ्लाइट में एक्सपेरिमेंट कर रहा था, एक चीज़, नई चीज़, AI बेस्ड आर्टिफिशियल इंटेलिजेंस की बात करी लोगों ने, तो एक चीज़ आ गई है जिसको आप सब भी जानते होंगे, चैट GPT। चैट GPT has created revolution in our lives and it has also created a revolution in the film industry. आप चैट GPT खोलिए और उसमें लिखिए कि मुझे एक स्टोरी चाहिए जिसमें अक्षय कुमार जैसा आदमी हो और वो इसके प्रेम में फंस जाता हो रवीना टंडन के, उसके बाद ये होता हो, उसके बाद ये होता हो, और सैड स्टोरी बना, एंड में बना दीजिए, वो आपको 2 मिनट में स्क्रिप्ट निकाल के दे देगी। तो किधर रहा लिटरेचर की ज़रूरत? हमारे आप और हमारा आपका लिटरेचर सन 60-70 में और आज का लिटरेचर जो मोबाइल पे लिखते हैं टेक्स्ट, आपको समझ में आता है क्या? मुझे तो नहीं समझ में आता। मेरा बेटा क्या लिखता है, क्या वो भी लिटरेचर है? और तो उसका एक्सपीरियंस और उसकी लाइक्स और डिसलाइक्स, हमारी आपकी लाइक्स और डिसलाइक्स से एक्सपीरियंस है बहुत डिफरेंट है। तो हम क्यों तुलना करते हैं? आज का जो सिनेमा होगा वो टेक्नोलॉजी बेस्ड है, वो बनेगा, लिटरेचर वाला लिटरेचर नहीं यूज होगा। आज लिटरेचर की डेफिनेशन ही बदल गई है। चैट जीपीटी ने स्क्रिप्ट आपको दे दिया 10 मिनट में, और वो दिन भी दूर नहीं जब एक नया चीज़ आ जाएगी, उसको कहेंगे हम वीडियो जीपीटी, और उसमें आप उसमें डाल दीजिए कि हमको इस खान की फिल्म चाहिए, उसमें ये होना चाहिए, उसमें 4 झटके लगने चाहिए, 2 गाने होने चाहिए, 1 डांस होना चाहिए, फिल्म बन जाएगी। फिल्म बन जाएगी, ये मैं आपको हाइपोथेटिकल बात नहीं बता रहा हूँ। इफ चैट जीपीटी कैन गिव यू अ स्क्रिप्ट इन 5 minutes, or not even 5 minutes, less than that, tomorrow there would be an AI driven tool which will produce film without you needing a script, without you needing a novel, without you needing a cinematographer, without you using an actor. It will create an actor. AI is already creating actors. So everything is driven by what is called artificial intelligence. इंटेलिजेंस शब्द बाद में आता है, अब आर्टिफिशियल पहले आता है। तो हम उस संसार में जी रहे हैं जहां एवरीथिंग इज ड्रिवन बाय आर्टिफिशियल इंटेलिजेंस। तो इंटेलिजेंस आप भूल जाइए, अब आगे वाली जिंदगी में सिर्फ हर चीज़ आर्टिफिशियल होगी। जब फिल्म आर्टिफिशियल होंगी, स्टोरीज आर्टिफिशियल हो सकते हैं, हम आप आर्टिफिशियल हो गए। हैंड ऑन योर हार्ट, हाउ मेनी ऑफ अस have those kind of sensibilities which were there in our forefathers, जो उनके अंदर जो एम्पैथी थी, जो सिंपैथी थी, जो संवेदनाएं थी, क्या आज हमारे अंदर वो हैं? बदल चुका है सब, समाज बदल चुका है, हमारा परिवेश बदल चुका है, एंड इट इज ऑल ड्रिवन बाय टेक्नोलॉजी। सो द वर्ल्ड विल चेंज एंड देयर इज नो, सो ये कहना कि लिटरेचर से फिल्में क्यों नहीं बन रही हैं, ये मुझे बड़ा incongruous लगता है। It's not a valid argument. Everything is changing and we are changing. Cinema is also changing, literature is also changing. तो अब तो आजकल मैरिजेस का ज़माना चला गया। यंगस्टर सिटिंग हियर, आजकल वो हमारे ज़माने वाली मैरिज नहीं होती थी, एक बार मैरिज हो गई तो 40 लास्ट तक मैरिज होती है। आजकल तो 6 महीने बाद घर जाना, इधर जाना, इधर जाना, वो सब शुरू हो जाता है। तो things around us are changing. So that is, but fact remains. Yeah, sorry. So that is all which I wanted to say. So we are living in a technology driven world, and therefore the definition of literature has changed, the definition of cinema has also changed, and therefore the relationship, the coefficients between cinema and literature has also changed. So let's accept that. Change is the only permanent thing in life. Yeah? Thank you so much. Thank you.
बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद सर, जो आपने अपनी दृष्टि से हम सबको बहुत से ऐसे छुपे हुए अंतर संबंध जो सिनेमा और साहित्य के बीच हैं उनसे अवगत करवाया। अंत में मैं अध्यक्षीय उद्बोधन के लिए अनुरोध करूंगा श्री गिरीश कासरवल्ली सर से, जिनकी बहुत कुछ भूमिका तो स्वयं हमारे पूर्व वक्ता ओपी श्रीवास्तव सर ने भी बना दी है, मगर औपचारिक रूप से उनके बहुआयामी व्यक्तित्व में से कुछ एक बातें जिनका मैं यहाँ पे जिक्र करना चाहूँगा। आप एक सुप्रसिद्ध और प्रतिष्ठित फिल्मकार हैं। आपने 15 फीचर फिल्में, कुछ वृत्तचित्र, एक टेलीफिल्म और एक टीवी धारावाहिक बनाया है। उनकी 15 फिल्मों ने अब तक 27 अंतर्राष्ट्रीय पुरस्कार, 25 राष्ट्रीय पुरस्कार और 44 बार कर्नाटक राज्य पुरस्कार जीते हैं। इसके अलावा आपने 17 बार राष्ट्रपति कमल पुरस्कार जीता है। आप पद्मश्री, कुवेंपु विश्वविद्यालय से और GITM विश्वविद्यालय कर्नाटक से मानद डॉक्टरेट के भी प्राप्त करता हैं। आप कर्नाटक में गैर मुख्यधारा फिल्म निर्माताओं के मंच चित्र समूह के संस्थापक और अध्यक्ष हैं। मनु चक्रवर्ती, प्रदीप बिस्वास, शक्ति सेन गुप्ता, जॉन हुड, OP श्रीवास्तव और गणेश मटकरी द्वारा लिखित आपकी फिल्मों पर मौलिक कार्य किए जा चुके हैं। मैं अनुरोध करूंगा श्री गिरीश कासरवल्ली सर से कि वे आएं और अपने अध्यक्षीय उद्बोधन से हमें कृतार्थ करें।
Thank you. Good evening. We were supposed to end this session at 5:30. It's already 6. So let me make it as short as possible because many of the things which I wanted to say has already been said. So I'll make it very short. First of all, I would like to thank Sahitya Academy for giving me this opportunity and also for including cinema in their program, because normally any activity that is related to literature keeps cinema out, because they think cinema is not part of literature, or not cinema is not part of art. That's why in many, especially in many they keep cinema out. But here they have included, it's not only in this session, on an earlier occasion too, I have attended one such seminars wherein literature, the interdependence of literature and cinema was discussed. In fact, earlier it was Kannada literature and Kannada cinema, and similarly another speaker spoke on other languages and other cinemas. The relationship between cinema and literature is both contentious as well as cordial. We have very often heard that people who watch films tend to compare the film with the original text and say this was better or that was better and things like that. I somehow don't want to get into that field at all, because for me there are two different kind of expressions. In literature, the writer uses the abstract words to create a concrete image in the minds of the reader, whereas in cinema, we use the concrete images to create an abstract meaning in the minds of viewer. So the movement itself in the two different sections. One is moving from abstract to concrete, the other is coming from concrete to abstract. So comparison itself is not valid. And there again, literature uses words which are basically abstract, but cinema uses images. When I say images, what I mean is not the images that are seen on the screen. That's a basic mistake we made while analyzing films. Images are not formed on the screen. Images are formed inside our mind. So images are screened inside our mind, not only through visuals. I don't use the terms images, I use the term visuals. Images are also created by sound, by editing, by acting, by other details of cinematography like art direction, music. That is the reason why the experience of reading a literature and experience of viewing a cinema is totally different. The famous film theoretician says it's very easy to experience cinema, but difficult to explain it. Why does he make this statement? Because the cinema, we get experience from all sources. Our eye watches it, ear listens to it. So it's easy to experience, but difficult to explain it because you don't know from which source that experience is being generated. That's why it's very difficult to explain a cinema. What do we do when we say cinema? We explain the story. Story is not cinema at all. Cinema is experience. There lies the difference. In literature, what we do is we narrate this one and give you the experience. But in cinema, it's quite different. The experience, first we experience and then we ideate. In cinema, first we ideate and then we derive the experience. The approach itself is from two different angles. Sorry, let me pick up the water. So, the comparison itself is not proper. It's like, I'm very sure you all have listened to this famous speech by Pandit Bhimsen Joshi, Maje Maze Pandari, which is based on a very famous abhang in Marathi. But reading of that particular thing and listening to Pandit Bhimsen Joshi are not the same. Do you agree with that? They are not same. If you read that particular composition, would you get the same kind of experience that you get while listening to Bhimsen Joshi? Not. So that is the difference, because one, most of the time, very often I ask whoever goes and watches the film, what is the film is all about? They will tell you the story. I said, I'm not interested in the story. You are telling me the story. It is not cinema. Cinema is something more than that. And how do you concretize it? How do you explain that? That is most important. That's why when it comes to adaptation, literary adaptation, the relationship between cinema and literature, when we adopt a published work, we tend to compare the original text because we think it is an adaptation. I'll say that's wrong. It is an adoption, not adaptation. You take the idea and groom it in your own field, and then that becomes a different child altogether. Because it has a different upbringing, it has a different parentage, and what you get is something different. For me, the best adaptations, how to do because out of my 15 films, 14 are based on Kannada literary works. Some of them are based on novels, some of them are based on short stories. But I never, ever remained faithful to the original. I always made a lot of changes. And I learned this by looking at masters. Kurosawa has made 2 films based on Shakespeare. One is Macbeth, it's called Throne of Blood. The other is King Lear, called Ron. If you read the play of Macbeth and go and see the film, the experiences are totally different because he's not basing his film entirely on this. He takes the essence and grooms it in his own Japanese backyard, and that becomes a different tree altogether. Not only it becomes a different tree, there are a lot of it gets a lot of different hues. In the film, The Lady Macbeth is a pregnant woman, which is not there in the original short novel, so original play. Why did Kurosawa make that small change? It's a small change. If you are looking for facts, it's a small change. But if you look at the meaning, it's a big change. Because she is pregnant, she is ambitious. She wonders what would happen to my offsprings. Will my son become a king? So she starts aspiring to make her son an emperor. So the seed of this one gets germinated at that point, which is purely in Eastern philosophy. It's not the Western, this one. Because in the Eastern philosophy, you always think the cruelty as per se, it doesn't exist. It's always the outcome of some kind of pressures. So Kurosawa brings that kind of pressures. Can you say now that this is based on Macbeth? The perspective itself is different. The plot is same. The perspectives are different. So when I say the film, I request you to look at the perspective and not at the plot. Similarly, when I say read a short story, don't look at the plot. My professor used to say, don't talk about plot, because each one has a story to tell you. So if you keep listening to all these stories, your life, one life is not enough. So don't listen to stories. Look for the perspective. What is he trying to say? How does he trying to say? And this is the difference between the literature and cinema. So I would say the cinema is different and this one is different, because though both are saying the same plot, their vision is different and the experience is different. There are certain things which cannot be replicated in cinema. As a filmmaker, I know what can be replicated in cinema, what cannot be replicated in cinema. I tell you some of the examples which have failed miserably when it is adopted into film. I don't know how many of you have seen by Fernando Berry's short film called The Man with Enormous Wings. It is based on a short story by this man, Marquez. When Marquez writes it, he is using words to convey the loneliness, the juxtaposition of evil and this one, goodness. But when you try to put it in visuals, creating a man with enormous wings itself becomes a problematic. So you don't get convinced at all. The image that it is created in the short story of Marquez, Berry fails to create that image in cinema because of the sheer physicality of the image itself. But that's one of the reasons why many of the novels by Marquez, he refused to give permission to adopt any of his novels. Camus' Outsider I have seen by very important writer, very disappointing, because it failed to do that kind of thing. Whereas some of the minor works turned out to be a great film. One such is the one Szabo's Mephisto, which is just a report of an inmate in a jail, in a concentration camp, and what a wonderful film it has turned out to be. That's because for Istvan Szabo, he knew how to build images in that, how to find right images in this novel, in this short report. So, when a filmmaker is looking for subject, He's not looking at the famous novel, how famous it is, or how the literary merits of the work. He looks at the possibility of converting it to film. They are two different things altogether. I quite often ask this question, if all great works can be turned into a great film, Ray would have definitely made a film out of Gora, not out of smaller films. So, but when it makes a smaller works into films, they become major works. Like say, for example, Nastanir, which Ray turned into a film called Charulata. The images that Ray could find in this novel, short story, is often referred to in the history of cinema as the outstanding, phenomenal landmarks. One is the loneliness of Charulata. Open any of the film books, they mentioned this particular thing. There's another image that is there in the film, which is the lost image of the film, which according to me is the finest image one has seen in the history of cinema, that is the lost freeze shot. People talk about the freeze shot of 400 Blows or the freeze shot of Makmal Buff's that film. But I would say this is the finest, greatest film. See what happens, Bhupati and Bhupati comes home and Charu goes and opens the door hoping that he would come back. Because there's some kind of a difference of opinion, because here Bhupati realizes that she had some this attraction towards his cousin. So when he comes back, now the question is, would he accept him or would he not accept? Would he accept her or would he not accept him? There's a brilliant lost shot. Charu stretches her hand, and after a pause, Bhupati raises his hand, and it freezes halfway through. And that is the end of the film. So it sets you thinking. A kind of an image which probably literature couldn't have created at all. So there are possibilities in both medium. Cinema has certain possibilities, literature has certain possibilities. Like in Patar Panchali, that bug dance scene, I don't think literature can create that. It's a kind of a lyrical movement because it's very close to music. Or the war scenes of Kurosawa, or the extravaganza that is being churned out today in Bollywood and Hollywood and all other woods. So we need to understand the the potential of medium, and then only look for start making comparisons. And while making comparisons, so we should not end up comparing the plot. We should end up comparing the vision of the filmmaker, vision of the writer. Plot is a device to drive home the point, to drive home the vision. So one needs to, when we were comparing cinema with literature, we need to do that. While talking about Charulata, I said there are certain things which cinema could do and certain things which was not there in the original short story by Rabindranath Tagore. I also would like to tell you some other examples which are great works of fiction as well as great films. I don't know how many of you have seen a film called Incident at Owl Creek by Robert Enrico. It's based on a short story by Umberto Boyce. Great works. The film is great. Film has won both Cannes winner, it's also an Oscar winner and many. That's picked up. It's considered to be a landmark in the cinema. It's about a hangman's story. He's about to be hanged, and he dreams of revisiting, going back and meeting his wife. But he's hanged. You should, you can, no amount of words can give you that experience of the last shot. When he's about to hug her wife, immediately there's a cut and he's hanged. That shock cannot be replicated by this one. But at the same time, you look at the text. B.F.'s text and Enrico's text are similar, identical. There's no difference at all. Word by word same. But experience-wise, they are two different films. They're two different. Similarly, Woman in the Dunes. One is by Hiroshi Teshigahara film, and the novel is by Abu. It's a very important novel, and it's a very important film. Here, the filmmaker creates a metaphor through sands. Whatever the words he uses, you cannot create that experience. But look at the text, they're similar. So that's why when we compare cinema and literature, we need to compare the visions of the filmmaker and not about the for me, the plot itself is very superficial. It's only a tool. It's not the end in itself. I have told you all my films are based on literature, literary works. I'll end my speech with a small anecdote which happened when I made my first film, Ghata Shraddha, which went on to win a lot of awards and is considered to be one of the 20 best films made in the 100 years of Indian cinema. It's based on a short story by Dr. U.R. Ananthamurthy. You know, Ananthamurthy was a towering figure, not only in Kannada literature, but also in the Indian context. He was the Sahitya Academy president, I think. He was he had won, including Gyanpith and Padma Bhushan, he has won many awards. When I decided to make the film, he wanted to have a look at the script because I was only 25 years young at the time. So he thought, will he be able to do anything out of this? So I gave him the script, and then when the film was made, I invited him to come and watch the film. After watching the film, that legendary writer says, I like the film because it doesn't resemble my short story. He said it doesn't resemble my short story in detail. He uses the word to word, but it enhances the experience. You know, that small statement, he said, he keeps on saying, he expanded the story, the vision of the story. You know, that small statement made me realize that should be this one for adaptation. That's why I said that it should not become an adaptation, it should become an adoption. You take the essence and use all your creative possibilities, cinematic possibilities, and then express it in the system. So while I am adopting the literature into literature into cinema, I look for few things. One is how it negotiates with the contemporary worldview. How does the story offer second thing is, how does the story offer me a space for intervention. If I don't have a space for intervention, I don't even pick up the story. Then, would it lend itself to cinematic rendering? This is something very important. Very often, the film adaptations fail because the filmmaker doesn't fail to comprehend whether the story can lend itself to cinematic adaptations or not. I've come up, this is kind of a very, statement which can be questioned. Not all stories lend itself to cinematic adaptations. This is my feeling. In Kannada, we have a great writer called Kuvempu. We consider one of his novels as the best ever written Kannada novels. According to me, it is my favorite novel. According to me, it is the best Kannada novel it has been written in Kannada. It's called Malegalalli Madhumagalu. I can never dare to adopt that into a film because its canvas is so huge, and three pair of bride and bridegrooms starts running away from the place, and if you keep all the three, it will become something like 10-hour long film. But if you delete any one of them, it loses its impact. So there it is purely the this one of time, but there are other things which also cannot be comprehended in the film. That's why some of the great adaptation of the great stories have failed, whereas some of the very ordinary James Hurley Chase turned out to be great films. Contempt, for example, one, Godard's Contempt. If you want to study further, you see some of these films, then you will understand what I am trying to say. Bartleby the Skinner by Herman Melville has been made into a film. Very, very unimpressive film, but from a very great novel. You also try to understand what went wrong, where. So probably they're all literature into cinema series. So what they have done, they have faithfully reproduced it. It failed. So one has to realize that also. There again, then I won't go into detail. That itself will take longer time. But cinema in one century tried to deviate from literature in a very big way. In 1929 itself, the concept of pure cinema started. Marcel Duchamp's attempt to do away with narration itself was the first attempt. And then in the past 1 century, you have seen a lot of people trying to do away with narration because they say we have borrowed it from literature. So let us delete those things which are all borrowed things. Then later on, some people, including Bresson, try to do away with acting because they said we are borrowing it from theatre. Do away with it. In that process, suddenly they realized there is one element in the film which no other arts which can be used in other arts, is the time. So in today's cinema, the time has become the central element of filmmaking. If you accept this statement, then the comparison between literature and cinema do not arise at all, because literature never depends on this kind of time, the continuous physical time. The cinema depends on continuous physical time. That's the reason why the today's cinema, whether it is slow cinema movement or the pure neo neo realist of 80s, which is popularized by the Iranian cinema, they are juggling with time, which is totally cannot be done in literature. So my search for pure cinema or real cinematic rendering is something totally different from. No ChatGPT can replace this kind of thing. ChatGPT can only create what Hollywood has examples from Hollywood or Bollywood or from Tamil or they cannot create this kind of philosophical search. They cannot replace philosophical search. So because of that, I am still very hopeful. Come what may, even if artificial intelligence replaces human being, they cannot replace the philosophy of cinema, philosophy of literature, and philosophy of the man's search for this one. With that, I'll end my thing. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Girish sir, for your wise words and for telling us that how literature and cinema are similar and different and what are their limitations and opportunities are. So I really thank all our speakers for their valuable time and for their gracious presence in our today's session. I would like to thank first of all the chair, Girish Kasarvalli sir, and the other speakers, Shri O.P. Srivastav sir, Ratnottama Sen Gupta ma'am, and Tripurari Sharan sir. Thank you so much. And I would request you to kindly take your seats in the front row. बहुत जल्द हम अपने आज के तीसरे और अंतिम सत्र के साथ शुरू करेंगे, जो आदिवासी कविताओं पर आधारित हमारा आज का तीसरा और अंतिम सत्र है। आप सभी से मेरा अनुरोध रहेगा कि आप हमारे साथ ऐसे ही धैर्यपूर्वक बने रहें और एक और बहुत ही मज़ेदार सत्र जो हमारा आदिवासी कविताओं पर आधारित है, हम बस अगले 2 मिनट में उसके साथ शुरू करेंगे। धन्यवाद।
मैं देख रहा हूँ कौन है। हाँ, वो वहाँ से वो होंगे पोखरिया जी मैं कराता हूँ। पोखरिया जी चलें भाई, चलिए।